The night Griffin Tate finally returned to God's house, he carried a woman in a blood-soaked wedding dress through the church doors while her would-be killer's horses thundered closer. Hey there, friend. Before we dive into tonight's tale, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. Now, let me tell you about the loneliest man in all of Texas. Griffin Tate hadn't spoken to the Almighty since the day he buried his wife and daughter in the hard-packed earth behind their homestead. 25 years of silence stretched between him and heaven, each Sunday morning finding him anywhere but inside those hallowed walls. The townspeople of Redemption Creek had long since stopped inviting him to services, stopped leaving baskets on his porch, stopped praying for his soul where he could hear them. You can almost smell the dust and old leather as Griffin sat in Madigan's saloon that October night, nursing his third whiskey while autumn rain hammered the tin roof. The other patrons gave him a wide berth, not from fear, but from respect for a grief that had aged into something harder than desert stone. His table in the corner had become as much a fixture as the spittoons and the faded painting of a reclining woman above the bar. Storm's getting worse, Heath Madden observed from behind the bar, polishing a glass with practiced indifference. The saloon owner had known Griffin since before, but like everyone else, he'd learned not to mention those days. Might be the worst we've seen since that flood in '72. Griffin grunted, watching amber liquid swirl in his glass. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains like God clearing his throat. Lightning illuminated the street in stark, stuttering glimpses, empty hitching posts, shuttered windows, the church steeple piercing the angry sky like an accusation. He was about to order another round when the saloon doors exploded open. She stood there like an apparition, white silk plastered to her body, dark hair streaming water, a crimson stain spreading across her bodice like spilled wine. The ivory wedding dress, once pristine, now clung to her frame in tatters. Lace hung in ribbons from her sleeves, and her veil was gone entirely, leaving her hair wild and free. Every man in the saloon froze, drinks halfway to lips, cards suspended mid-deal. "Please," she gasped, and her voice carried the kind of desperation that makes grown men remember their mother's prayers. "He's coming." Griffin was on his feet before his mind caught up with his body. Something about the terror in her eyes, green as spring grass, wide as a spooked mare's, yanked him from his whiskey haze. She swayed, one hand pressed to her side, the other reaching blindly for support. He caught her before she hit the sawdust floor, and the weight of her in his arms stirred memories he'd spent decades drowning. "Who's coming?" Heath demanded, already reaching for the shotgun beneath the bar. The click of him cocking it echoed through the suddenly silent saloon. Dax Monroe. The name fell from her lips like a curse. Every man in the saloon knew that name. The rancher who owned half the county and considered the other half his for the taking. A man who collected wives like cattle and treated them worse. I couldn't do it. Couldn't marry him. Not after what I learned. Blood seeped between Griffin's fingers where he pressed against her side. Not all of it was hers, he realized. Some had already dried to rust brown, and the pattern suggested violence dealt rather than received. There was gunpowder residue on her hands, and her right index finger bore the telltale bruising of someone who'd pulled a trigger repeatedly. How many writers? Griffin heard himself ask, the tactical part of his mind awakening after decades of dormancy. 6, maybe 7. She gripped his shirt with surprising strength, her fingers leaving bloody prints on the faded blue cotton. "They'll burn this whole town to find me," he said. He said he'd make an example of anyone who helped me. The saloon erupted in nervous chatter. Dax Monroe didn't make idle threats, and his men were recruited from the worst the territories had to offer. Ex-soldiers, failed prospectors, men with nothing left to lose and a taste for violence. Heath started barking orders, sending men to check weapons and bar doors. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Griffin said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew the truth. Nowhere in Redemption Creek could hide someone from Monroe's wrath. The town was too small, too exposed, and Monroe had too many friends among those who valued their lives over their principles. "The church," she whispered, and Griffin's blood turned colder than mountain snowmelt. "It's the only place he won't." "No." The word came out harsher than intended, sharp enough to make her flinch. "Anywhere but there." She studied his face with those impossible green eyes, seeing past the weathered exterior to something deeper. The lamplight caught the gold flecks in her irises, and for a moment, Griffin saw another pair of green eyes, smaller and innocent, looking up at him from a church pew. He blinked hard, banishing the ghost. "You're Griffin Tate, the man who lost his faith." He didn't deny it. Couldn't. His reputation preceded him in Redemption Creek. The rancher who'd turned his back on God and lived despite heaven itself. "Well, Mr. Tate," she said, struggling to stand straighter despite the pain twisting her features. "I'm Indy Barton, and I just put 3 bullets in Dax Monroe's brother. So unless you want to see this town painted red, we need holy ground." Now, the name hit Griffin like a physical blow. Alara Ellis's cousin, he remembered now. The girl from back east who'd arrived 3 months ago to marry into the Monroe fortune. Young, beautiful, and naive enough to believe Dax Monroe's promises of love and prosperity. Now she stood before him, baptized in blood and rain, having learned the truth the hard way. The math was simple and terrible. Monroe's men would arrive within the hour, maybe less given their fury. They'd tear through every building, every home, seeking their prize. The saloon would fall first, then the hotel, then the houses where families huddled behind thin walls. But the church, even men like Monroe's, drew the line at desecrating God's house. Usually, but as Griffin's hand touched the iron handle of the church door, the sound of approaching hoofbeats rose above the storm's fury, and a voice he recognized. As Dax Monroe himself called out, "Burn it all down, boys. Start with the saloon." The iron handle burned cold against Griffin's palm, 25 years of avoidance ending in this moment of desperate necessity. Behind them, orange light bloomed against the rain, the saloon's windows glowing with fresh-lit flames. Screams and gunshots punctured the storm's roar as Monroe's men began their terrible work. "Open it," Indy urged, her weight sagging heavier. Against him. "Please, Griffin. I can't die out here. Not like this." His hand trembled on the handle. Inside those doors lay memories sharper than any blade. Sarah's voice lifted in hymns, little Emma's giggles during sermons, the weight of their coffins carried down this very aisle. But outside, death rode closer with every heartbeat. Griffin yanked the door open and pulled Indy across the threshold. The church smelled exactly as he remembered: beeswax candles, old wood, and that particular mixture of hope and dust that clings to holy places. Lightning flashed through stained glass windows, painting the empty pews in brief kaleidoscopes of color. The altar stood unchanged, its simple wooden cross presiding over rows of seats that had once held everyone he'd loved. "Thank God," Indy breathed, then caught herself. "Sorry, I didn't mean." "Save your breath." Griffin guided her toward the vestry, away from the windows. "Tell me what happened." "All of it." She collapsed onto a bench, pressing a hymnal against her wounded side. In the dancing shadows cast by the burning town outside, her story spilled out like blood from a fresh wound. 3 months ago, I thought Dax Monroe was salvation itself. Handsome, wealthy, promising me a life I'd only read about in novels. Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. But his brother Callum couldn't keep his hands to himself. When I told Dax, he laughed. Said I should be flattered that Monroe men found me so appealing. Griffin's jaw tightened. He'd known that Monroe brothers were bad news, but this was worse than he'd imagined. Tonight was supposed to be my wedding. Dax had the whole ranch decorated, half the county invited. But an hour before the ceremony, I overheard Callum joking with the ranch hands, boasting about what he'd do once Dax got tired of me. How they'd always shared everything, ever since they were boys. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Including their wives. The flames outside grew brighter, casting hell light through the church windows. Griffin could hear horses circling the building, men shouting orders. They were surrounded. "So you shot him?" 3 times. Indy's chin lifted with defiant pride. "Once for every time he put his hands on me. I took Dax's own pearl-handled Colt from his study to do it. Seemed fitting." Despite everything, Griffin felt a grim smile tug at his mouth. That took courage. Courage. She shook her head, wincing at the movement. "I was terrified. Still am. But Alara always said." She stopped abruptly. "Alara Ellis. Your cousin." Griffin's voice went flat. "The schoolteacher. You know her. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Alara Ellis, with her gentle ways and steadfast faith, who'd tried so hard to bring him back to the fold after Sarah and Emma died, who'd finally given up when he'd told her exactly what he thought of her God and his mysterious ways. The church doors rattled under a heavy fist. "We know you're in there." Dax Monroe's voice carried through the wood, smooth as snake oil, and twice as poisonous. "Send out my bride, and we'll let the rest of you live." "He's lying," Indy whispered unnecessarily. Griffin had already counted 7 distinct voices outside, cataloged their positions by sound. Monroe had brought his whole crew, and they wouldn't. "Leave witnesses. Stay here." Griffin checked his rifle, then moved toward the windows. Through the rain-blurred glass, he could see the devastation already wrought. The saloon burned like a torch, and flames licked at the hotel's roof. Families fled into the storm, some toward the church, others scattering into the darkness beyond town. "Tate," Monroe called again. "Yeah, I know it's you in there. Remy Navarro saw you carrying her. You've got 1 minute before we come in after her." Remy Navarro. Griffin should have known that Snake would be riding with Monroe. The Mexican gunslinger had a reputation for creative violence and a particular hatred for Americans who'd fought in the war. "What makes you think I won't just hand her over?" Griffin called back, buying time while his mind raced through options. 7 men, limited ammunition, and a wounded woman who could barely stand. The math wasn't favorable. Monroe's laugh was ugly. "Because Heath Madden told me all about you before we set his bar on fire. The great Griffin Tate, who lost everything and blamed God for it. You really think you can find redemption now? After all these years?" The word hit home harder than any bullet. Redemption. This whole damn town was named for it. Built on the promise that anyone could start over, could be washed clean. Everyone except him. "I don't need redemption," Griffin growled. "Just ammunition." Brave words for a dead man. Monroe's voice hardened. "But I'm feeling generous. Send her out, and I'll make sure your death is quick. Keep her, and I'll let Remy work on you for hours. He's got some real creative ideas about what to do with a man who helps steal another man's woman." Indy appeared at Griffin's elbow, moving with the desperate strength of the dying. She'd torn strips from her wedding dress to bind her wound, and found a pistol somewhere, probably from the vestry drawer where Reverend Hollings kept it for troubled times. "I won't let them hurt you because of me," she said. "I'll go out there. Maybe if I surrender, he'll kill you slow to make a point." Griffin didn't sugarcoat it. "Then he'll kill me anyway, along with anyone else who saw you tonight." "Then what do we do?" Griffin looked around the church, at the altar where he'd married Sarah, at the pew where Emma had sat swinging her little legs during sermons, at the floor where he'd knelt and begged God to spare them from the fever. His prayers had gone unanswered. Then, but now, "We make them come to us," he said, "and we make them pay for every inch." Outside, Monroe's patience expired. "Time's up, Tate. Boys, remember, I want her alive. Everyone else is fair game." The first window shattered, and smoke grenades rolled across the church floor. As acrid clouds filled the sanctuary, Griffin pushed Indy behind the altar and prepared to make his stand. He might not believe in God anymore, but he'd be damned if he'd let Monroe's men desecrate this place with more blood. But as shapes moved through the smoke and gunfire erupted, a voice Griffin hadn't expected to hear rang out from the church's back entrance. "Nobody move, or I'll blow this whole place to kingdom come." Standing there with tears streaming down her face and a bundle of dynamite in her raised hand was Alara Ellis herself. Alara Ellis stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, her schoolmarm's dress soaked through, her usually neat brown hair plastered to her head. The dynamite in her hand, 3 sticks bound with twine, trembled but held steady. Griffin had seen that same determined set to her jaw the day she'd buried her parents, the day she'd taken over the school, the day she'd finally stopped trying to save his soul. "Alara, no?" Indy gasped, starting forward before Griffin caught her arm. "Stay right there, cousin." Alara's voice carried the same authority she used on unruly students, but underneath lay steel Griffin had never heard before. "And you, Dax Monroe, call off your dogs before I send us all to judgment." The smoke began to clear, revealing Monroe's men frozen in various positions of attack. Dax himself stood near the pulpit, his expensive suit incongruous among the violence. Even in the chaos, He maintained the bearing of a man who'd never been denied anything. Miss Ellis, Monroe's tone shifted to honeyed persuasion. You're a respected woman in this town. Surely you don't want to throw your life away for a murderer and a faithless drunk. Murderer. Alara stepped further inside, keeping the dynamite high. The fuse remained unlit, but her other hand held a lit candle, wax dripping onto her fingers. Your brother got exactly what men like him deserve. As for faithless, we're all sinners here, Mr. Monroe. Some just hide it better. Griffin couldn't stop staring at her. This wasn't the gentle woman who'd brought him food after Sarah died, who'd sung hymns while teaching children their letters. This was someone forged in a fire he hadn't witnessed, shaped by struggles he'd been too lost in. His own grief to notice. You're bluffing, Remy Navarro spoke from the shadows, his accent thick with contempt. Good Christian women don't blow up churches. You're right. Alara smiled, and it was terrible. Good Christian women turn the other cheek. They forgive. They endure. The candle flame wavered closer to the fuse. But I stopped being good the night I found Mary Hutchins in my schoolhouse, beaten half to death by Monroe Ranch hands. I stopped being Christian when Sheriff Dalton told me boys will be boys. And I stopped being a woman the moment I decided. Your reign of terror ends tonight. The truth hung in the air like incense. Griffin remembered Mary Hutchins, a saloon girl who'd disappeared 6 months back. Everyone assumed she'd moved on to greener pastures. But the look in Alara's eyes suggested a darker story, one the town had collectively chosen to ignore. Where is she now? Indy asked softly. Safe. Finally. Alara's gaze never left Monroe. Along with 2 others your men convinced to leave town. Did you really think nobody was keeping count? Nobody was watching. Monroe's facade cracked slightly. You've been hiding whores? Interfering with what? Your business. Alara laughed, sharp as breaking glass. Yes. For months now. Every woman you and yours drove out, I helped disappear properly. New names, new towns, new lives far from here. She glanced at Indy. You were supposed to be next. I had everything arranged. But you had to go and shoot Callum instead of running. Like I told you. You told her to run. Griffin couldn't hide his surprise. I've been telling her to run since the day she arrived. Alara's voice cracked slightly. But she had stars in her eyes and wouldn't listen. Not until tonight. The pieces clicked together in Griffin's mind. Alara Ellis, mild-mannered schoolteacher, had been running an underground railroad for abused women right under Monroe's nose. The sheer audacity of it, the courage, made his chest tight with something he couldn't name. Touching story, Monroe drawled, but sweat beaded on his forehead. Changes nothing. My bride comes with me, and anyone who stands in my way dies. Yes, we've established your limited vocabulary. Alara brought the candle close enough to the fuse that several men stepped back. But here's what you haven't considered, Mr. Monroe. This church. It's been soaked in kerosene. Every wall, every pew, every board of this sacred floor. One spark, and we all meet our Maker together. Griffin inhaled sharply, finally recognizing the acrid undertone to the smoke. Not just from the grenades, from accelerant. The whole building was a tinderbox. You're insane. One of Monroe's men whispered. No, Alara corrected. I'm done. Done watching good women suffer. Done pretending law and order mean anything in this town. Done believing that God will intervene if we just pray hard enough. Her eyes found Griffin's across the room. I finally understand why you stopped coming here. Why you stopped believing. Sometimes, heaven's silence is answer enough. The words hit Griffin like a physical blow. This woman who tried so hard to restore his faith had lost her own, and somehow that hurt worse than any accusation she'd ever leveled at him. But unlike you, Alara continued, still looking at Griffin, I'm not content to sit in a saloon and pickle my grief. Some of us choose to act. Alara, Indy pleaded, this isn't you. This isn't, what? Christian. Alara's laugh was wild. Neither is forcing women into marriage. Neither is sharing wives like property. Neither is burning down half a town for wounded pride. She focused on Monroe again. So here's what happens now. You and your men leave. Tonight. Forever. You sign. Over the ranch to the town trust I've established. Yes, I've had papers drawn up for months, and you disappear. Or we all burn together, and let God sort us out. Monroe's hand inched toward his gun. You won't do it. You won't destroy this church. All these. The candle touched the fuse, The hiss of burning powder filled the sanctuary like a serpent's. Warning. Men scattered, some diving for windows, others freezing in place. Monroe himself stumbled backward, his composure finally shattered. "Stop her," he screamed. "Someone stop her." But Griffin was already moving, not toward Alara but to shield Indy with his body. If these were his last moments, at least he'd spend them protecting someone instead of mourning. The fuse burned shorter, sparks cascading like falling stars. "Choose," Alara shouted over the chaos. "Leave or burn." 10 seconds. In those elongated heartbeats, Griffin saw everything with crystalline clarity. Monroe's men abandoning their leader, Remy Navarro diving through stained glass, Dax himself standing paralyzed by disbelief that anyone would dare defy him so completely. And Alara, magnificent in her terrible resolve, prepared to die for principles Griffin had thought extinct in this world. The fuse burned down to nothing. Nothing happened in the ringing silence that followed. Alara smiled and pulled the blasting cap from the dynamite, revealing it had never been connected. "Did you really think I'd destroy the only sanctuary these women have known? But you believed it, didn't you? Because deep down, you know what you've driven good people to become." She looked directly at Griffin. "Sometimes, Mr. Tate, faith isn't about believing in God. It's about believing we can be better than our worst moments. Now then, who's ready to sign some papers?" The silence stretched taut as a hangman's rope. Monroe stood among his scattered men, rage and humiliation warring on his face. Half his gun hands had already fled through windows and doors, leaving only the most loyal or most stupid behind. Remy Navarro picked glass from his hair, cursing in Spanish. "You played me for a fool." Monroe's voice came low and dangerous. "No," Alara corrected, setting the harmless dynamite aside. "You played yourself. I just provided the stage." She reached into her dress pocket and withdrew folded papers. "Now then, about that signature." Griffin kept his rifle trained on the remaining men while Indy leaned heavily against the altar. Blood had started seeping through her makeshift bandages again. They needed to end this before she collapsed entirely. "You think a piece of paper signed under duress will hold up?" Monroe laughed, but it rang hollow. "I'll have every lawyer from here to Austin. With what money?" Alara's smile was sharp. "Did you think I've been idle these past months? While you were terrorizing women, I was copying ledgers. Your bookkeeper, Mr. Finch, he's been quite forthcoming about your creative accounting. The rustled cattle sold under false brands. The water rights stolen through forgery. The tax records. That would make very interesting reading for federal marshals." Griffin watched Monroe's face cycle through emotions like a man watching his house burn down. The rancher had built his empire on fear and violence, never imagining someone might attack him with paperwork and patience. "Finch wouldn't dare, wouldn't he? After what you did to his daughter." Alara's voice could have frozen hell itself. "Oh yes, I know about that too. Little Amy Finch, who you said ran off to San Antonio. She's in California now, with a new name and a chance at a real life. Her father's been helping me document everything ever since." Indy stirred against Griffin's shoulder. "Alara, how long have you been planning this?" "Since the day I realized prayer wasn't enough." Alara's eyes never left Monroe. "Since I understood that evil men prosper because good people do nothing but wring their hands and hope for divine intervention." The words echoed Griffin's own loss. A faith so perfectly it made his chest ache. Here was someone else who'd looked to heaven for justice and found only silence. But where he'd turned inward, drowning in whiskey and solitude, she'd turned outward, becoming the answer to her own prayers. "Sign the papers, Dax." Alara stepped closer, and even unarmed, she seemed more dangerous than any gunman. "Sign them, leave tonight, and never return. Or stay and face federal marshals with some very interesting questions about your business practices. And that's assuming you survive the night. Half this town lost property in your little rampage. They'll want blood come morning." Monroe's hand twitched toward his gun again, but Griffin cocked his rifle audibly. "Try it. Please. Give me the excuse." "You wouldn't dare shoot me in a church," Monroe sneered. Griffin smiled coldly. "I already told you, I don't believe in God anymore. This is just a building to me. Nice acoustics for a killing, though." But even as he said it, Griffin felt the lie burn his tongue. Standing here with Alara's courage blazing before him, Indy's faith bleeding out beside him, Something long dead stirred in his chest. Not faith exactly, but perhaps its ghost. Boss, Remy Navarro spoke carefully. Maybe we should consider the lady's offer. Shut up. Monroe's composure finally cracked completely. I won't be driven off by some schoolmarm and a faithless drunk. This is my town. My land. No. A new voice spoke from the doorway. It's our town. Heath Madden entered, soot-stained and singed, but very much alive. Behind him came others, townsfolk Griffin had drunk beside for years without really seeing. Nova Hastings from the general store, her husband's shotgun in her hands. Kiera Wells, the banker's wife, holding what looked suspiciously like dynamite that wasn't fake. Even old Ivy Lennox, who ran the boarding house, carried an ancient pepperbox pistol. Thought you burned, Monroe said weakly. Takes more than fire to kill Redemption Creek, Heath replied. We've been through drought, flood, and Comanche raids. You're just another disaster to weather. He looked at Alara with something approaching awe. Though I'll admit, we didn't expect our salvation to come from the schoolhouse. More people filled the church, men and women who'd hidden in their homes, who'd turned blind eyes to Monroe's cruelties, who'd chosen survival over righteousness. But here they stood now, armed with whatever they could find, faces set with determination. Seems you miscalculated, Griffin told Monroe. You can rule through fear, but push too hard, and even sheep bite back. Monroe looked around wildly, seeing his empire crumble in real time. His remaining men were outnumbered 10-1, and more townsfolk kept arriving. The burning of the saloon and hotel had been the final straw on an already overburdened camel's back. Fine, he spat. Give me the damned papers. But as Alara stepped forward with the documents, Indy suddenly cried out. No, it's a trap. Monroe's hidden derringer appeared like a conjurer's trick, aimed not at Alara but at Griffin. Time slowed to honey. Griffin saw the hammer fall, saw the powder flash, felt the inevitable approach of lead and death. Then Indy was there, shoving him aside with strength born of desperation. The bullet meant for his heart caught her shoulder instead, spinning her into the altar. She crumpled like a discarded wedding dress, red spreading across white silk. The church erupted. Griffin's rifle spoke before conscious thought, and Monroe's derringer flew from his hand along with 2 fingers. The rancher's scream was drowned by the roar of dozens of weapons cocking simultaneously. Nobody moved. Alara commanded, but her voice shook now. She knelt beside Indy, pressing hands to the new wound. Oh, cousin, you brave, foolish girl. Griffin dropped beside them, his hands joining Alara's in the desperate work of keeping Indy's life from spilling onto holy ground. Her eyes fluttered, finding his face. Guess I found my faith after all, she whispered. Just took a bullet to do it. Don't talk, Griffin ordered, but his voice came out broken. Not again. He couldn't watch another woman die in this church. Not when he'd just started to remember why living might matter. Griffin Tate, Indy managed, blood bubbling on her lips. You'd better start believing in something. Because I didn't take a bullet for a faithless man. I took it for one worth saving. Her eyes closed, and for the first time in 25 years, Griffin Tate found himself praying. Not to the God who'd taken his family, but to whatever power might let him keep this strange, brave woman who'd shown him that redemption wasn't about faith in heaven, but faith in each other. And somewhere in that desperate prayer, he heard Alara whisper, "The doctor's coming. Hold on, both of you. Just hold on." Dr. Cornelius Pike worked by lamplight, his instruments gleaming like sacramental silver. The church had transformed into a makeshift hospital, pews pushed aside, altar covered with clean sheets from Ivy Lennox's boarding house. Griffin hadn't left Indy's side in 3 hours, his hands still stained with her blood despite repeated washings. The bullets lodged near the shoulder blade. Pike murmured, probing carefully. Half an inch lower, and we'd be planning a funeral. As it is, he met Griffin's eyes. She's lost too much blood. Without a transfusion, she won't see dawn. Then give her mine, Griffin said immediately. It doesn't work that way. Blood types have to match, and we've no way to test. I'll do it. Alara stepped forward, rolling up her sleeve. We're cousins. Same grandmother. If anyone's a match, it's me. Pike hesitated. The procedure's risky. I've only read about it in medical journals from back east. If your blood doesn't match, then we'll both die. Alara's jaw set with familiar determination. I've been ready to die for my principles all night. At least this death would mean something. Outside, Monroe sat shackled in what remained of his own wagon, his mutilated hand wrapped in dirty cloth. The townsfolk had voted exile over execution, though barely. Remy Navarro and the others were already gone, scattered like roaches when the light comes on. By morning, the Monroe Ranch would belong to the town trust, its profits earmarked for a new school, a proper hospital, and resources for women seeking sanctuary. Do it, Griffin told Pike. Whatever you need, just save her. The doctor nodded grimly and began his preparations. As he worked to connect cousin to cousin through rubber, tubing, and prayer, Griffin found himself really looking at the church for the first time in decades. The bullet holes in the walls, the shattered windows, the bloodstains on sacred ground. It should have felt like desecration. Instead, it felt like consecration of a different kind. She was right, you know. Heath Madden appeared at his elbow, offering a flask. About you being worth saving. Griffin waved away the whiskey. I'm not the one bleeding out on the altar. No, but you've been bleeding out for 25 years. Just did it slower. Heath pocketed the flask. Sarah wouldn't have wanted this for you. Neither would Emma. The name still hurt, but differently now. Less like wounds, more like scars, signs of healing rather than injury. How would you know what they wanted? Because I knew them. We all did. Heath gestured at the townsfolk maintaining vigil in the damaged church. Sarah used to say you had the biggest heart in Texas, that you felt everything too deep. Said it was what she loved most about you, even if it scared her sometimes. Griffin's throat tightened. She said that, right here in this church, 2 weeks before the fever took them. Was worried about leaving you alone with all that feeling and nobody to share it with. Heath smiled sadly. Guess she was right to worry. Across the room, Elara lay pale but steady as her lifeblood flowed into Indy. The procedure looked barbaric, too. Women connected by tubing and hope, but Pike worked with careful precision. Each minute that passed without catastrophe was a small miracle. I blamed God, Griffin said quietly. When they died, I blamed him for taking them. For not answering my prayers. We know. But watching Elara tonight, Griffin struggled for words. She lost her faith too, but she did something with it. Built something. While I just sat in your saloon feeling sorry for myself. You were grieving. For 25 years. Griffin shook his head. That's not grief. That's cowardice. I was so afraid of feeling that kind of loss again. I stopped feeling anything at all. A weak cough drew their attention. Indy's eyes had opened, unfocused but aware. Griffin was beside her instantly, catching her searching hand. Still here, she whispered. Where else would I be? Saloon. A ghost of a smile. Heard that's where you live. Not anymore. The words came without thought, but Griffin knew they were true. Someone recently showed me there are things worth sobering up for. Smooth talker. Indy's fingers squeezed his weakly. Is Elara saving your life? As usual. Griffin glanced at the other woman, who managed a wan smile despite her pallor. Seems it runs in the family, this business of redemption. Not redemption, Indy corrected. Just people choosing to be better than they were yesterday. That's all faith really is, isn't it? Believing tomorrow can be different than today. Griffin thought about that as dawn light began creeping through the broken windows. The church would need rebuilding, but maybe that was fitting. Maybe everything broken could be remade, stronger for having survived the breaking. Transfusions holding. Pike announced, checking both women's pulses. Another hour, and we can disconnect them. I'd call it a miracle if I believed in such things. Believe in them or not, Elara said weakly. They happen anyway. Griffin Tate in a church, praying for someone else's life? If that's not miraculous, I don't know what is. The townsfolk began to disperse as the immediate danger passed, but many promised to return. There was talk of rebuilding not just the church, but the whole town. Creating the community Redemption Creek had always promised to be, but never quite achieved. Monroe's reign had ended. But more importantly, the town's complacency had died with IT's full daylight filled the sanctuary. Griffin helped Pike disconnect the transfusion apparatus. Both women would live, though recovery would be slow. Indy needed rest and care, things Griffin found himself unexpectedly eager to provide. So what happens now? Indy asked as they settled her more comfortably. Now, Griffin looked around the bullet-scarred church, at the blood-stained altar, at the morning light streaming through shattered glass. Now we rebuild. All of it. The church, the town, ourselves. Together? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Griffin thought of 25 years of solitude, of whiskey-drowned sorrows and unanswered prayers. Then he looked at this woman who'd taken a bullet for him, who'd shown him that faith wasn't about God answering prayers, but about people answering each other's. Together, he confirmed, and meant it. Later, as the doctor declared both women stable and the last of Monroe's wealth was distributed among his victims, Griffin stood before the altar where he'd married Sarah, where he'd cursed God, where he'd found something like faith again. The cross still stood, unmarked by bullets. Steady as always, he didn't pray, exactly. But he did speak, quietly, to whatever might be listening. I still don't understand why you took them. Probably never will. But maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe the point is what we do with the grief, whether we let it bury us or build with it. He paused, feeling foolish but continuing anyway. Alara built a whole underground railroad. Indy found the courage to fight back. Even I finally did something besides drink and mourn. So maybe that's answer enough. A hand slipped into his. Indy, who should have been resting but had never been good at doing what she should. Beautiful morning, she said simply. Griffin looked at her. This runaway bride who'd crashed into his life like a thunderstorm, all blood and desperate faith, and found himself smiling. Really smiling, for the first time in decades. Yes, he agreed. It is. And in the sunrise-touched church where sorrow had turned to hope, where violence had birthed justice, where faithless hearts had found reason to believe again. Griffin Tate finally understood that redemption wasn't about God forgiving you. It was about finally forgiving yourself. Now, friend, if this tale of lost faith found and desperate courage stirred something in your soul, I'd ask you to leave a kind word below and share it with others who might need reminding that it's never too late to step back into the light. And remember, sometimes the most powerful prayers are answered not by heaven, but by the brave hearts of those who stand beside us in our darkest hours. Until next time, keep faith with each other and keep riding toward that horizon.